It's worse than I remember. Every note transporting me to a nightmare realm of the mind. Nothing I can do but hold out. Hurry, ants. Hurry!
Ant-Man, a character who first debuted in Tales to Astonish number 27, this in 1962. That being the original Hank Pym version, created by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby. With Stan Lee saying of his creation, "I did one comic book called The Man in the Anthill about a guy who shrunk down and there were ants or bees chasing him. That sold so well I thought making him into a superhero might be fun." I like that it's ants or bees. It was something. Something small was chasing him. People liked it. From there, Ant-Man would not only go on to have a complex and at times fraught history, but also become a mantle passed on to multiple characters. Depending upon where you are in the fandom, what elements of it you enjoy, what time you came into it, you may be more or less familiar with certain versions. Scott Lang certainly gained a big mainstream boost thanks to being the main Ant-Man of the MCU. Time of recording, the MCU Ant-Man is on his 3rd movie, which of course means that instead of going to check it out, reminded me that there was an Ant-Man Anniversary comic. I was trade waiting on this. For this paperback, compiling the event Ant-Man Ant-Iversary, celebrating 60 years of Ant-Man. Why yes, that is a pun, and why yes, there are more puns like that on the inside. Get excited. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics. Let's take a look at this kind of unique spin on the way to do an anniversary for a character. Sorry, an Ant-Iversary. You know people want you to take your book seriously when there's a quote on the front and not just one word by an entire sentence. Sometimes you get those one-word quotes that can be entirely taken out of context. Amazing, says the Washington Post, but if you go the whole thing, it's Lee bad at the end of it. The cover is a compilation for the 4 issues that made up this Ant-Man story. They're all minimalist half shots of the various Ant-Man costumes. They're simple but eye-catching, although potentially impenetrable if one isn't an Ant-Man fan or someone who's drawn the costume/armor. The series is written by Al Ewing with art by Tom Reilly, colors by Jordi Belair. On working on the series and why it appealed to him, Ewing had this to say: "It's the most common answer. I'm a fan. I've been a fan of the character from way back, before I even got to work at Marvel. But when I say a fan of the character, I have to qualify with which Ant-Man I'm talking about and when. I mean Hank Pym, and a particular 60s era Hank Pym from those old black and white essentials collections that printed 500 pages of old comics in these big black and white phone books. Hank had a run of stories that were wonderful one-offs, having all kinds of fun with the concept of shrinking down and commanding ants. They felt much lighter and more whimsical than other stories of the era. They were almost camp. I'm a huge fan of this one tiny fleeting instant of the original Ant-Man, and I thought it'd be fun to do a riff on that. Everything kind of built itself up from there, from the idea of revisiting old eras of Ant-Man to tell a new story that's big and wild and far-reaching, and as a result, I'm now a fan of the other Ant-Man too. So he's coming at this from a fan of Hank Pym first and the other Ant-Man as it went along, and we'll see how that plays out as we go through this. It must be said that this comic does come across like a love letter to Ant-Man, and eventually the entire concept, not just Hank Pym, though that is paramount. It also embraces continuity and works within it in some fun ways to both honor and at times have some tongue-in-cheek fun with the different era's writing and art. It also tries to have fun with the future era of Ant-Man, from the 25th century. So there's a lot of effort here. Some of it really lands, some doesn't, some of it miles will vary. The eras start off in order of Ant-Man, but they switch around a bit. This so Scott Lang can end up the last story because he's the current time of recording Ant-Man. So our first stop is the 60s era story, but before that we have this kind of intro that's playing with the concept of how the narration is delivered. The intro narration attempts to differentiate itself by playing with the concept that information will be disseminated differently in the future, and the idea that reading or experiencing media will have fundamentally changed. Reader instruction: visualize the following word combination: antiseptic, artificial, metamaterial. Thank you. Inhale now. Thank you. You are imagining the scent of the air as your mind processes the visual component trademark of this Marvel trademark narrative experience trademark. Stop trying to make odor vision happen. It's not gonna happen. Spoiler warning, do not pre-acquire knowledge of this character's identity. Further information will be revealed at a future narrative stage. Thank you for your patience. Reader instruction: during the following temporal displacement montage trademark, contemplate the following questions. So as one can see, it's a blending of current era concepts and narrative conventions, such as the idea of spoilers and the like, but with the concept that information will be inputted differently to an audience. It's supposed to make you feel as if you're in another time, potentially getting some kind of directly to the brain vibe with extrasensory perceptions built in. It is a good way to differentiate this narration and this era from the rest of the stories, and it does give these segments a different vibe. However, of course, one still has to read these sections. You don't get the odorama vision or any of those things. So there is a bit of a disconnect into what this narration is proposing and how you still need to receive it. So while it's conceptually interesting and makes sense in terms of its its placement. Mileage is going to vary on how much readers engage with it or enjoy the style narration box. The first tale is Alone against the Ant-Agonists. It's a good pun. You don't have to reach too hard. It was built into the word. These pages are meant to emulate the style of the 60s, and Tom Reilly puts in a solid effort. But of course, with the numerous changes in just basic style, coloring, paper, digitization, and more, it's not exactly the same. But it's a solid attempt to bring forth the energy of that era. With these recreations, there's also always the element of how they were perceived by the artist that's on top of the way the art is drawn. So there's how it's perceived, how it actually looks, and how those two things manage to blend together. Now as for the art here, it has a retro stylized look that does evoke a kind of classic sci-fi vibe and will feel distinct from later tales in this series. So it does work as intended. As does narration, which is attempting to match those old school Marvel ones, although it is less hype than those were. You need to dial up the hype at least 30 points. You wouldn't expect a tumultuous tale of vengeance and villainy to begin with a simple trip to the movies. But at Mighty Marvel, we like to surprise you. And so, they say this movie was produced by the Submariner himself from live footage of the Fantastic Four. I can't believe we finally have a chance to see it. The Submariner versus the Fantastic Four? Clearly this is only the first movie, there needs to be at least 10. This is one of those nice nods to this classic era in general. As in the Fantastic Four, there was an issue, it was number 9, where Namor was a movie producer. It was of course largely an attempt to woo Sue Storm. What wasn't back in those days? This story plays with the idea that heroes went to see the movie, which was shown got made at the end of that FF issue, which is a fun concept in and of itself. And it's a nice little nod and reference to those Marvel Renaissance era of stories. If you're familiar with the different eras these stories are taking place in, you will notice little nods here and there throughout the stories. Does the heart of a cineast beat underneath that stuffy exterior? I probably mispronounced that because I've never seen that word before. Oh Hank, darling, correct my pronunciation. Of course, this movie is the perfect research on how Mr. Fantastic uses his size-altering abilities in battle. Phooey, I should have known you couldn't leave Ant-Man at home. I should do a little research on Prince Namor and see how you like it. Whoa, whoa, step off. That's Sue's turf. He would not be interested. Oh, the thirst of the 60s wasp. A staple. Again, though, you gotta dial it up many points to match the 60s. Nice angry eyebrows on Jan. At the theater, Pym is harassed by young Eric O'Grady, the future irredeemable Ant-Man, establishing that indeed O'Grady was always awful. What a through line. It starts with throwing popcorn at people in the theater and ends with you stealing an Ant-Man suit and spying on women in the shower. You do the same thing for Hank. It starts by taking your girl to the theater and ignoring her so that you can go harass a boy who threw popcorn at you. It ends with you slapping your wife. One extra large with extra butter. And your phone number, doll. There he is, and making a nuisance of himself again. Yes, a nuisance. That's one way to describe it. Pym sneaks out to teach this kid a lesson with ants, cause with great power comes the ability to mess with people with all of your ants. Ant army assemble. Ant-Man, having successfully scared O'Grady but not scarred him away from ants for life, then meets the future Ant-Man, who is mysterious. So he chases him out to the street, where he is accosted by some of his classic villains. Window cleaning fluid? Nah, Ant-Man, paralyzing fluid. It's been a while, but I still got plenty left. Blazes, I can't move or even speak. Thank God we still have thought bubbles and that spray-wielding hoodlum. I remember him. Why, it's villains like the window washer. And for every villain they introduce, they do a quick, wait for it, accurate editor's note as to where you can go see them. So if you need to see Trago the Trumpeteer with powers of hypnosis, now you know where to go. And who doesn't need more of that? Just listen to him. We got him, Daddy-O. Step on the gas. Trago's so hip. But you won't go easy, Pym. You'll feel all of our powers one by one, and they'll finish you off. Maybe not yet, Daddy-O, but we'll see how you feel after a solo from the magic trumpet. Earmuffs on, everyone. The hallucinations Trago's music causes can drive a man mad. But that just makes me kind of want to hear it. You know, in an earlier panel, Hank was worried about his secret identity being exposed, but the Protector is just here yelling, or rather speaking calmly, his name. Why didn't he tell the others? Ignore that little bit of not quite tracking continuity. Just put it in a box and put it away, because this story certainly is going to. Get immersed in the jazz. It's worse than I remember. Every note transporting me to a nightmare realm. The mind. Nothing I can do but hold out. Hurry, ants. Hurry! This panel is very cool and has that psychedelic vibe, although again, not going as hard as these things would in the 60s. On Doctor Strange, it got pretty trippy. The Wasp needs to come help after the ants summon her, and there's a Scott Lang sighting, which is less well integrated than the Eric O'Grady one, as it isn't tied to anything in the plot and is much more a cameo cuz. In that, it could be cut and little would be lost, except for the wraparound element of each Ant-Man being in each story. Ant-Man manages to escape thanks to being hit with an aging ray that shrinks his muscles and lets him slip out of the restraints. It's also a clever way to introduce the Ray to the story because it's going to play a part later on.
And now I'll reverse blast the Ray to restore myself to my true age. Lucky the Ray only reverses artificial aging. I'd hate to think of a madman like Marsh becoming immortal.
That's a nice recreation of the expository dialogue that used to happen during this era of Marvel Comics. The old stories used to try and explain away as many loose ends as possible to explain exactly what was happening and kind of circumvent fan questions so that you wouldn't have those people writing in and have to give them the no prize that would be developed later on. Take that, fans who would have asked the question about why Marsh didn't just de-age himself. Answered. Boom, mic drop. All's well that ends well on this date night until Hank Pym is captured and taken to the future.
I am the Ant-Man, and I need your help, Dr. Pym, to save the world of tomorrow from the deadliest menace of yesterday.
How long do you think he waited to say that? Because it's kind of amazing. You notice the future when you or your costume have glowing circular lights affixed in a vaguely triangular formation. In the future, we've embraced triangles. Next, we have O'Grady Ant-Man. He debuted in 2006 in Civil War Choosing Sides #1. This story is called Imposter Syndrome and focuses on the aforementioned Eric O'Grady. And it's set in the era when he had just stolen the Ant-Man costume, or he hasn't figured out how the suit works yet. It also features a recap at the start. Hey, remember how an ant used to do recaps in Irredeemable Ant-Man back in the noughties, maybe 6 years ago, Marvel time? Well, that was my distant ancestor, and I'm here to continue the family tradition. And then we get a recap of what happened. And they also explain who Eric is, which is helpful, and how he stole the Ant-Man prototype designed by Pym, but also that Pym was a Skrull at the time. It's very tongue-in-cheek, but it catches you up. It's a nice callback to those issues and some of the formatting and style choices that were made therein. It also allows you to recap in a creative manner that's different from the last issue. O'Grady needs Pym particles to make his suit work, and he's trying to figure out how to get them. Option 1, no shrink gas, no Ant-Man, dump the suit, go on the run as Eric O'Grady, use all my shield analyst skills to stay one step ahead, die in jail. Option 2, keep the suit with no shrinking, use my jet legs, weak armor, and talking to ants to stay one step ahead, die in jail. As you can see, they're both homaging and lightly lambasting the use of those copy-paste multiple heads panels that was extremely popular in the mid-aughts, and it's a style that some still use, though it has largely fallen out of favor with the public in general, and is viewed by many as lazy, or just repetitive. It can work and be creative, but there is an art to doing that, and most use it as a simple copy-paste. Scott Edward Harris Lang, aka Ant-Man 2, powers size reduction via Pym particle gas, communication control of insect, primary affiliations Avengers, Fantastic Four, current status deceased, cross-ref events file Avengers 500, Avengers Disassembled incident. Do we want to talk about Avengers Disassembled? We're just gonna leave that there. Wait, so the last guy who wore a suit like this, he's dead? He just got blown up at random? Dear Lord, that's awesome news, woohoo! This issue goes out of its way to make O'Grady more into the lovable loser type and less creep. Even though he's about to set off to Scott Lang's grave to try and steal Pym particles from it, we're gonna leave the creeping on Carol Danvers to talk about some other time. Just like they left the backhanding of the Wasp to some other time. Because as Ewing specifically said, he's focusing on a very specific era, which was before any of that happened. It's a celebration of Ant-Man, not a rundown of questionable Ant-Man moments. Though of those two questionable moments, Pym's is the more interesting and has more going on historically. From there potentially being a miscommunication between artist and writer, to then being used as a full arc and examination through the guise of mental illness, domestic abuse, and more. They addressed that one at least. It was a whole story. There was a whole story arc. People focus on the one panel, but they actually really built that out and did something with it. One may not enjoy that it happened or enjoy the storyline, but they really ended up trying to make something of it, which in my opinion is admirable, but miles will vary. Some people can never see Hank past that panel ever, no matter what. And others think it's time to let it go, or acknowledge that there have been other depictions. Share your thoughts down below. Anyway, more cute details. The title Imposter Syndrome is meant to play on a couple of situations. One is Eric O'Grady, though the actual phenomenon of imposter syndrome doesn't really apply to him. Then you have Skrull Pym, who is an actual imposter, and also has green thought bubbles. Nice touch. Note that this and the first story employed thought bubbles, which time of recording have fallen out of fashion. O'Grady meets the future Ant-Man at the grave, and uses it as an opportunity to ask him about the ending of certain TV shows and various sports events, which causes future Ant-Man to leave thoroughly disillusioned. Just in time for O'Grady to have a fight with Skrull Pym, who had been operating under the idea that O'Grady was some kind of secret agent with nefarious plans, and not just incompetent and morally questionable. This time our Ant-Man gets sucked away mid-fight, and with a Star Wars reference. I don't know, this isn't me doing this. Help me, Ant-Man, you're my only... And we get to see some teases as to what's happening in the future. Big giant hand. The third story, The Electric Ant, which yes, is a reference to the Philip K. Dick story. This is the story set in the present in terms of continuity. Time of recording. Nobody checks the date. That's why I say that so frequently, by the way. Like all the stories, this one highlights multiple Ant-Men. Our heroic Ant-Man is Scott Lang, who's alive, he got better, and also features his daughter, Cassie, aka Stinger. For villains, we have Black Ant, who is an LMD or life model decoy of Eric O'Grady. He debuted in Secret Avengers number 24 in 2012, but he debuted as Ant-Man, then later as Black Ant in Secret Avengers 32, still in 2012. He was sent in as a double agent after O'Grady was killed. We also have Ultron Pym, who is the fusion of Ultron and Hank Pym, kinda sorta. Because Iron Man discovered that Hank Pym had died when this happened, so it's just Ultron inhabiting his corpse and thinking he's fused with Hank Pym. Dark. Or is it? Is that still where they stand? We'll see. So there's a Philip K. Dick story called The Electric Ant. It's about a guy who looks human, thinks human, acts human, but really he's an ant. A human-like robot. I mean, he runs off tape with holes punched in it. Phil kind of lost me there, but aside from that, feels like my story. See, he's talking to himself here. It's 2022/2023. Thought bubbles are dead. Bring them back, please. If a character can come back to life, so can thought bubbles. Look, they were in the older stories. They were beautiful, weren't they? Didn't they help the flow of narration? Weren't they lovely? I'll never be over it. I know things change, but I can't let them go. So the Avengers are looking for a way to safely contain and deal with Ultron Pym, and they think they found it. Their plan essentially is to shrink it and dump it in the microverse. Stop putting your trash in the microverse. It only ends badly. What? Like I'm not gonna bring my pride and joy to see where Daddy works? Okay, one, you don't work here, Dad, and two, I'm not a bring your daughter to work day, okay? I'm your partner, so Scott Lang, who also stole an Ant-Man suit, though his directly from Pym and not a souped-up Skrull version from S.H.I.E.L.D., debuted in 1979 in Avengers 181, but made his debut as Ant-Man in Marvel Premiere 47 that same year. As you can see with this more modern version, the writing is much more jokey in a not taking the character as seriously kind of way, and less in a making jokes of the scenario or of the character's flaws type way, which was more what was going on in the O'Grady story. This is more trying to make the overall atmosphere just quippy in general. This Ant-Man has been influenced by the MCU version and writing style, as has the entire humor profile of this issue. I could be useful out there, I could lend you some shrink gas, Tony Stark, Ant-Man could be the next big thing. They're gone, Dad. Why are you always trying to suck up to those guys anyway? You saved the world. We saved the world, kiddo. You've beaten Dr. Doom. You got blown up in the line of duty. The Avengers should treat you better. Stop acting like you're one of the little guys. Dad, you're not. You're Ant-Man. This depiction of Lang is not going to land for all. For some, it'll feel like he's being downplayed, while for others, it will feel period accurate. Of course, all this goes awry, and we get some Ultron Pym trying to manipulate things to escape. This thanks to his access to Pym's abilities. It took me a long time to reconfigure my tech from in here, but now I can transmit and receive. Speak mind to mind with my fellow Ant-Men. I'm alive, Scott. It's me, the original Ant-Man. I just need you to set me free. Snap out of it! I like that Black Ant is sitting. Shows he had time to get comfortable. Not that any of that works out well for him. Big fly, eat big fly, not eat big fly, but take big fly's hat. That's got my shrink stuff in it. Since when do you talk to non-ants, Lang? How is that fair? Oh, we are so arch enemies now. But it's finally time to grab Scott Lang. That means we got all the Ant-Man we need to go to the future. Back to the future. And now we see all the things that we've seen kind of hinted at in the final panels of each issue come together, coalescing. We get to see that the big bad is some kind of mega-powered All-Father version of Ultron. All-Father Ultron Pym, but they just call him All-Father Ultron. This takes us to issue 4 in our future Ant-Man, Zane Asghar. And we return to the narration style from the beginning of the book, along with a false history of how we got to this version of All-Father Ultron. This is complete with some fake editor's notes, but it's clear that they are meant to be referencing these future events. Zane Asghar is born to eco-scientists in a reclamation settlement in Earth Sector 4 with an aptitude for nanorobotics and a deep interest in pre-Ultronic history. He develops an obsession with somehow redeeming the inventor of Ultron, Henry Pym. All Human Ant-Man Origins #1. I actually would read a comic called All Human Ant-Man. Also, I'd want to see how someone got obsessed with redeeming Hank Pym. Asghar is using all his time travel tech to just go back in time and be on forums. Don't judge Pym by that one panel that one time. So Asghar is trying to perfect nano-ants, which is why he went to make contact with past Ant-Men for their ability to communicate with ants, because he's trying to recreate some extinct species, and he needs to see what they were actually like when they had natural instincts, which he hasn't been able to recreate. This era as to why he's doing what he's doing is the most vague, because we're more focused on the fact that there is a giant All-Father Ultron. But of course, his time travel rules. By him going back in time, he allowed the Ultron version of Pym access to the future. So he has to go back and get various versions of Ant-Man to come and help him. And so now we get to see the events occur in chronological order and see how that impacts the overall battle. And it does all slot together nicely, and it's not confusing to follow. You have this big battle where each Ant-Man gets to have a moment against All-Father Ultron. Okay, are we absolutely sure this will work? I've been told I suffer from hubris, but maybe that's part of what it means to be Ant-Man. Because when you're the world's smallest hero, the best thing you can do is think big. And all of the Ant-Man get to have a moment where they chat together. All bond. The end. And at the end of this trade, you get a couple of classic Tales to Astonish issues, which if you enjoy stuff from the classic era is a treat, which I do. You get things like the first Protector issue and Hank being rapidly aged. Fun stuff. This was a pleasant surprise and a clever way to honor the character and concept of Ant-Man. As mentioned, there was effort put into this. Ewing stated, "I've done my best to recreate or predict each of those eras of comics, and Tom Reilly's been throwing himself right into it along with me. If you're a fan of Ant-Man and his long legacy, I'm pretty sure each of these issues will bring a smile to your face and you'll have fun watching how each of the Ant-Man turns up in the others' issues." That statement, it holds true. Each era attempts to have its own distinct writing and art style, as well as the paneling and layout. And the future era is trying to carve out and be its own thing. Although in terms of extrapolation, that one does the least. It has a bit of a different style, but the narration boxes pull most of that weight. The art and paneling doesn't get too experimental, although it does have a distinct art style. Now, of course, it's not a direct one-to-one in terms of era, but in certain moments it gets very close, especially with the modern time of recording era, which is bang on because it's what's happening at the moment, which Ewing still currently writes for. The aughts also get very close, while the first issue set in the Renaissance captures the energy, if not the exact cadence. So if you have a favorite or least favorite era, you may also have a favorite or least favorite issue. These issues are all interconnected, but aside from the last, can also credibly be read alone and still be enjoyed. But they do slot together nicely in terms of characters and items and little Easter eggs or moments that you can see that link them together. Of course, if you saw any inconsistencies, your time is now. Let me know down below. It doesn't get convoluted or confusing as time travel plots can, nor does it lean too heavily into overplayed tropes like paradoxes, and it doesn't dwell on any look the mistakes of the past led to a terrible future. Instead, it stays focused on Ant-Man and celebrating the character and concept. The idea that Ant-Man has become a legacy character, while still also highlighting the original, is maintained throughout the mini, with each Ant-Man getting some attention, although Hank gets the most love. It is, as mentioned, a love letter to Ant-Man, and also the various eras of canon, and it takes time to highlight both the highs and lows lovingly, poking fun at some moments that weren't exactly people's favorites. There's more love in this than a lot of characters get in their anniversary issues, if they get one at all. Now, of course, it's not going to be for everyone. Being a fan of Ant-Man is going to play a part in how this series lands, and if one even seeks it out in the first place. Now, especially if one is not a fan of Pym, or if one doesn't like certain moments in Ant-Man's history, to see them highlighted may be irritating. Or on the other hand, to see them not talked about at all. For some of them, if they're not kept up with the present or not familiar with the past, it could feel either impenetrable or like a call to check out what's going on in some of these eras. Miles will vary. Others may not feel that certain eras are well represented. And for others, this just may feel random or off the beaten path, and they just may not be interested. You'll have to share your thoughts down below. For me, this was a fun, loving ode to the character of Ant-Man, and it had this extra reverence for canon and the history, which appeals to me. But those are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. I know some of you feel that canon is just a bird and a stone around one's neck. Did you read this? Were you aware of it? Did it grab you? If so, which was your favorite? Your least favorite? Was it not for you? Tell me things down below, and while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some other day spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.